John couldn't believe what he had discovered. The three figures before him were unlike anything he had ever seen. Their skin seemed to glow softly in the dim light, and their eyes sparkled with colors that seemed impossible to describe. They were humanoid in shape, but clearly not human. His heart raced with excitement and curiosity, mixed with a little fear. He knew he had to approach them carefully. After all, he was alone with three beings from a completely unknown world. For hours, John tried to communicate with them. He pointed to objects in the ship, showing simple gestures, and spoke slowly, repeating his words as if they could understand him. At first, the women only watched him quietly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and caution. They didn't speak, but their eyes followed his every movement. John realized that their silence didn't mean hostility. It was just the way they were trying to understand this strange human in front of them. To help them feel safe, John decided to make the ship more comfortable. He adjusted the lighting to a softer glow, lowered the temperature to a pleasant level, and cleared some space for them to sit and rest. He brought water and food he had packed for himself, showing them how to drink and eat it. At first, they hesitated, unsure of what to do, but eventually they mimicked him, sipping water and nibbling small pieces of food. John smiled, relieved. It was a small success, but it meant they were starting to trust him. As they became a little more comfortable, John noticed small details about them that amazed him. One of the women had long silver hair that shimmered even in the soft light. Another had deep violet eyes that seemed to see everything at once. The third had a faint golden glow surrounding her skin, as if she carried a tiny sun within her. John could hardly believe that he was in the presence of three beings so beautiful, so different and yet so gentle. After a while, John decided to test their reactions to sounds and touch. He played a simple melody on a small music device he had brought with him. The music floated through the cabin, soft and calm. The women tilted their heads, their eyes widening in surprise. One of them even reached out her hand toward the source of the sound, as if trying to understand it. John realized that they were intelligent, curious, and capable of learning. This wasn't just a strange encounter. It was a chance to meet beings with a whole new perspective on life. Communication remained a challenge. They didn't speak any language John knew, and their gestures were sometimes confusing. But he noticed patterns. When he smiled and moved slowly, they relaxed. When he pointed to himself, saying "John," they nodded or repeated the sound back in their melodic voices. It wasn't perfect communication, but it was a start. They were learning from him, and he was learning from them. John felt a growing connection, a silent understanding forming between them. As the hours passed, John decided to focus on their physical well-being. He checked their vitals and made small adjustments to their stasis pods, which had kept them alive for so long during the ship's drift. He cleaned the area around them and made sure the environment inside the ship was stable. Every small task he performed seemed to comfort them. They no longer flinched when he moved close. Instead, they watched him curiously, their eyes filled with wonder. Eventually, one of the women reached out and gently touched John's hand. It was a soft, almost hesitant gesture, but it filled him with a sense of relief and joy. He understood that they were beginning to trust him, even if they didn't fully understand who he was or why he was there. He responded by holding her hand lightly, showing that he meant no harm. In that simple act, a bridge of trust was built, a deep connection between human and alien that words could not describe. As evening turned into night, John realized that the women needed rest, even if they were no longer in stasis. He made a small area for them to sit and lean comfortably, wrapping soft blankets around them. They seemed to respond positively, closing their eyes and relaxing. John stayed nearby, keeping watch, feeling a strange sense of responsibility he had never experienced before. These beings depended on him, at least for now, and he accepted that responsibility willingly. During the quiet hours, John began to notice small, subtle abilities they possessed. One of the women seemed to sense his emotions, moving closer when he felt anxious or worried. Another seemed to understand some of his gestures almost immediately, showing an intelligence that went beyond normal learning. The third had an almost musical way of communicating, humming softly in patterns that made John feel calm and focused. It was as if each of them brought a unique gift, and together, they created an atmosphere of peace and curiosity. By the end of the night, John realized that this was no longer just a human helping three aliens. It was the beginning of a true partnership. They were learning from him, he was learning from them, and together they were creating a small world of trust, understanding, and care inside the abandoned spaceship. John felt a mix of excitement and wonder. He knew there were countless challenges ahead, how to communicate fully, how to repair the ship, and how to keep them safe. But he also knew that this moment, right now, was special. As he finally sat down to rest, John couldn't help but smile. He had bought a broken, abandoned ship on a whim, expecting nothing more than a hobby project. Instead, he had found three living, breathing beings from another world. He didn't know how long they had been traveling or what dangers they had faced, but he knew that he had the chance to help them, and perhaps even learn from them in ways he had never imagined. That night, as the stars shone brightly above the junkyard, John felt that for the first time, his lifelong dream of touching the stars might not be so impossible after all. John had always been fascinated by space. Ever since he was a little boy, he would stare at the night sky for hours, imagining distant planets, strange stars, and alien worlds far beyond his reach. As he grew older, his fascination never went away. He became an engineer, building and fixing machines, always dreaming that one day he might touch the stars. But life had a way of keeping him grounded. He worked long hours in factories and workshops, fixing engines and machines for people who needed them, and though he enjoyed his work, his dream of exploring space remained just a dream. One sunny afternoon, John read about an unusual sale in a small intergalactic news bulletin. It mentioned a huge junkyard on the edge of the city where old spacecraft and starships were sold for very little money. Some of them were broken beyond repair, some were missing parts, and some were just abandoned relics from long-forgotten missions. The thought of seeing real spacecraft made his heart beat faster. Without much hesitation, he decided to visit the junkyard. When John arrived, the place was even bigger and stranger than he had imagined. Mountains of metal, broken engines, and smashed spacecraft filled the area. Some of the ships looked like they had been there for decades, rusted and faded from years of exposure to the harsh sunlight. The smell of old metal mixed with the scent of oil and machinery. It was chaotic, almost magical in its way. People were walking around, checking out old engines, parts, and machines. John wandered slowly, feeling like he had entered a different world. As he walked deeper into the junkyard, he spotted a ship that looked different from the rest. Its metal was scratched and faded, but its shape was unusual and elegant. Unlike the other ships, this one seemed almost alive, like it had a story to tell. John's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't explain why, but something about it called to him. Maybe it was his imagination, or maybe it was fate. He walked closer, inspecting the ship carefully. The hull was covered in dust and some parts were missing, but overall it looked repairable. He imagined himself working on it, polishing the metal, fixing the circuits, and maybe even flying it one day. The owner of the junkyard, an older man with a wide smile and sun-tanned skin, noticed John's interest. "That one," he said, pointing to the ship. "It's been sitting here for years. No one wants it. You can have it for a small price if you're willing to take it as it is." John felt a surge of excitement. Without thinking too much, he agreed and bought the ship. He didn't know exactly why he did it. Maybe it was impulse, or maybe it was destiny. All he knew was that this ship, broken and forgotten, had to belong to him. After arranging for the transport, John spent the next few hours preparing to enter the ship for the first time. He had imagined this moment for years, walking into a real spacecraft, seeing its controls, feeling the cold metal under his hands. When the hatch finally opened, he stepped inside, expecting nothing more than dust, broken wires, and a few old tools left behind. But what he saw made his jaw drop. In the corner of the ship, partially hidden under a tattered cover, lay three figures. At first, John thought they were mannequins or lifelike robots left by someone who had abandoned the ship. But as he stepped closer, he realized they were alive. Their skin shimmered softly under the dim light, almost like a faint glow. Their hair floated slightly as if it were weightless, and their faces, though calm and peaceful, seemed not entirely human. John froze, unsure of what to do. His mind raced. Were they aliens? Were they dangerous? Or were they hurt and in need of help? Despite his fear, John's curiosity and compassion took over. He knelt beside one of the figures, feeling for a pulse. To his relief, he found it steady, slow but alive. His hands trembled slightly as he examined them, trying to make sense of the impossible situation. They seemed to be in a deep sleep, some kind of stasis, and it was clear that they had been there for a long time. He couldn't hear any breathing at first, but then he noticed the faint rise and fall of their chests. John realized he had to act carefully. He had some basic knowledge of biology and medicine, enough to keep them safe until he figured out what was going on. He checked the air system in the ship, made sure the temperature was stable, and used his engineering skills to restart a few life support systems that had been turned off. All the while, he spoke softly, almost as if his words could reach them even in their sleep. Hours passed as he worked patiently. He made small adjustments, careful not to disturb them too much. Eventually, one of the figures stirred, her eyes fluttering open. John held his breath. She looked at him, blinking in confusion, and let out a soft sound almost like a song. Though he didn't understand the language, he could feel the emotion in her voice, fear, wonder, and relief all mixed together. The other two soon followed, slowly waking from their long sleep, equally surprised to find a human there. John stepped back, giving them space, and used gestures to show he meant no harm. He pointed to himself and said his name, then gently touched his chest, trying to communicate that he was friendly. It took a long time, but eventually, the first one nodded slightly, understanding his intention. They looked around the ship, unsure and cautious, but no longer afraid. John realized that this moment, which had started as an ordinary day in a junkyard, had become something extraordinary. He had bought a broken ship, expecting nothing, and had discovered something that could change his life forever. As the sun began to set outside, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, John sat back and watched them. He didn't know who they were, where they came from, or what challenges awaited him, but he felt a strange sense of purpose. He knew that this was only the beginning of an incredible journey, one that would take him farther than he had ever dreamed, into a world of wonder, mystery, and friendship beyond the stars. The next morning, John woke up early, full of energy and ideas. He had spent the night thinking about the 3 alien women and their situation. They were clearly far from home, and he felt a strong responsibility to help them, but he also realized that understanding them would not be easy. Their language, their habits, and even the way they thought were completely different from his own. Still, he was determined to try. After all, he had never been one to back away from a challenge, especially one that promised adventure and discovery. He started the day by preparing a small breakfast. Simple food and water, easy for him to share and demonstrate. The 3 women watched carefully as he ate, their curiosity growing by the minute. One of them tentatively took a sip of water, then another. They seemed to enjoy it, and their soft smiles made John feel a sense of connection he had never felt with anyone else. He realized that trust could grow even without words. Actions, patience, and care could build bonds that language sometimes could not. After breakfast, John decided it was time to learn more about their story. He gestured for them to sit near him and slowly began to draw shapes and symbols on a small notepad. Circles, lines, and simple pictures representing themselves, their ship, and John. At first they stared at him, puzzled. Then, slowly, they began to respond with small drawings of their own. One drew a small planet with 3 suns. Another drew a tall structure that looked like a tower, and the third drew creatures that looked like themselves. John realized they were trying to tell him where they came from and what their world looked like. It was an incredible moment. He could see the pride and longing in their eyes as they shared pieces of their lives. He asked questions using simple gestures, pointing to the drawings and then to himself, and they responded patiently. Though he didn't understand the words, he began to piece together a story. They had been traveling in their ship when something went wrong, and they had ended up drifting in space for a long time. At some point, their ship had been abandoned, leaving them in stasis until John found them. The more he learned, the more he felt a sense of duty. These women had been through so much, and now it was his chance to help. John also noticed how intelligent and perceptive they were. They seemed to understand complex ideas quickly, even without a shared language. When he pointed to a broken panel in the ship and mimed fixing it, they watched closely, nodding and even imitating some of his gestures. He realized that with time, patience, and practice, they could learn to help him repair the ship. The thought excited him. Not only was he helping them, but he was also forming a team that could work together to solve impossible problems. As the day went on, John tried small experiments to understand their abilities. He noticed that one of the women could sense his emotions without him saying a word. When he felt uncertain or worried, she would gently touch his arm or smile, calming him instantly. Another seemed to have an extraordinary memory, remembering every small gesture and movement he made, predicting his actions before he completed them. The third had an almost musical way of communicating, humming in patterns that seemed to convey meaning beyond language. John was amazed. They were not only beautiful and kind, but also incredibly talented and capable. He realized that they were trying to communicate more than just words. Their gestures, expressions, and even the way they moved seemed to carry meaning. John began to pay close attention, noticing small signals he had ignored at first. A tilt of the head, a soft hum, or a glance in a certain direction could mean yes or no or help. Slowly, he built a system of understanding, and it became easier to share ideas and plans. Each success made him more confident that they could work together to achieve something incredible, repairing the ship and finding a way home for the women. Later in the afternoon, John decided to give them a tour of the ship. He showed them the control panels, engines, and living quarters. At first, they were cautious, stepping lightly and touching surfaces carefully. But as John explained, using gestures and drawings, they became more comfortable. They asked questions in their own way, pointing to buttons, screens, and levers, clearly curious about everything. John laughed quietly, feeling a mixture of pride and amusement. Even in such a strange situation, life could feel warm and ordinary, full of small joys and discoveries. During this tour, John noticed how much they cared for each other. They communicated silently, sharing glances and small touches that seemed to reassure one another. It was clear that they were not just companions, they were close friends, perhaps even family. John felt honored to be allowed into this circle, and he treated them with the utmost respect, careful not to overstep boundaries or frighten them. Trust was fragile, he knew, and he didn't want to risk it. As evening approached, John and the women settled in a common area of the ship. They were growing more comfortable with each other, though the language barrier still existed. John tried to teach them simple words and gestures from his world, while they shared small glimpses of their own culture. He noticed small details, the way they reacted to light, sound, and movement, and even the way they arranged themselves in the space. It was like learning a new language, but one that included gestures, feelings, and actions. By the end of the day, John felt exhausted, but happy. They had made progress, not only in communication but also in trust and understanding. He realized that helping them was no longer just about repairing the ship or ensuring their survival. It was about learning from them, growing together, and forming a connection that transcended worlds. He had stumbled upon something incredible, something that would change his life forever. Before he went to bed, John made sure the women were comfortable and safe. He adjusted the lighting, checked the temperature, and left small refreshments nearby. He watched them settle in, feeling a sense of peace. Though the journey ahead would be long and filled with challenges, he was confident that they could face it together. For the first time in his life, John felt that he was part of something truly extraordinary, a story that went beyond dreams and imagination, reaching into the stars themselves. John had spent several days learning about the three alien women and their extraordinary abilities. Now, it was time to focus on a bigger challenge: repairing the ship. The vessel, though intact in shape, had suffered years of neglect. Its engines were corroded, wiring was frayed, and essential systems had shut down long ago. John knew that fixing it alone would take months, perhaps longer, and he also understood that the women's knowledge could be invaluable. Together, they might have a chance. He started by showing them the ship's control room. The panels were a mess of blinking lights, some working, most not. John tried explaining what each dial and lever did, pointing and miming actions. At first, the women seemed confused, but their sharp eyes quickly picked up details. One of them reached out and gently touched a screen, and to John's amazement, the display lit up slightly, responding to her touch. She smiled at him, and he realized that their understanding of technology might surpass his in some ways. Repairing the engines was the first major task. The machinery was old, worn, and covered in layers of dust and rust. John rolled up his sleeves and began cleaning and inspecting every part. The women watched him carefully, then began mimicking his movements, learning how to handle tools and parts with precision. One of them, with her delicate but strong hands, removed corroded pieces, while another studied the wiring, pointing out which connections might be safer to fix first. John marveled at how quickly they adapted to human tools, even though their own technology must have been completely different. As the day progressed, they faced unexpected challenges. One of the main power conduits sparked unexpectedly, filling the cabin with smoke. John jumped back instinctively, but one of the women stepped forward and waved her hands in a strange pattern. The sparks stopped immediately, and the conduit stabilized. John stared in disbelief. It seemed they had abilities beyond what he had understood. They weren't just intelligent, they could interact with the ship's systems in ways he could never imagine. From that moment on, he realized that the repair work would be a true collaboration, combining his engineering skills with their unique abilities. They worked tirelessly for days, each day discovering new strengths. One woman had an incredible sense of spatial understanding, able to see the ship's systems as a whole and suggest adjustments that made repair work far more efficient. Another had extraordinary patience and precision, able to perform delicate tasks without making mistakes. The third seemed to have a natural intuition for energy flow, helping John identify problems in circuits and engines that he might have spent hours trying to figure out. Their teamwork was seamless, built on trust, patience, and a shared goal. Despite the progress, the work was not easy. Old engines required constant cleaning and alignment, worn wiring had to be carefully replaced, and software systems needed complete recalibration. John occasionally felt frustrated, wishing he could fix everything in one go. But the women's calm and supportive presence reminded him that patience was key. They encouraged him, sometimes just by smiling or humming softly, and their encouragement made him push forward even when the work seemed impossible. During breaks, John and the women found time to learn more about each other. Though language was still limited, gestures, drawings, and music became their ways of communication. John shared stories of Earth, its cities, forests, and oceans, while the women sketched their homeworld, showing landscapes filled with floating mountains, shimmering rivers, and glowing plants. These moments of sharing strengthened their bond, making them not just collaborators but friends. They laughed together, marveled together, and sometimes sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying the presence of each other. One evening, after hours of work, the ship's engine roared to life. For the first time in decades, John's heart leapt. The vibration under his feet, the hum of energy, the subtle glow of operational systems. It was a moment of triumph. The women clapped softly, their eyes sparkling with excitement. They had done it together. For John, it was more than just a technical achievement. It was proof that patience, teamwork, and understanding could overcome any challenge. It was also proof that trust between worlds was possible. With the engines working, John turned his attention to navigation and life support. The control panel still needed fine-tuning, and the navigation system was completely outdated. Here, too, the women's abilities were invaluable. They could sense energy flows and system anomalies, helping John calibrate the ship with precision. They worked late into the night, testing and retesting every function. John had never felt such a sense of satisfaction. The ship was no longer abandoned. It was alive again, ready for a new journey. Finally, after weeks of tireless effort, the ship was operational. The hull gleamed under the dim light of the junkyard, engines ready, systems stable. John looked at the three women, his heart filled with gratitude and admiration. They had faced unknown challenges together, overcoming fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. They had become a team, united not by language or species, but by trust, respect, and a shared dream. The ship was ready to leave the junkyard, and the journey ahead promised adventure, discovery, and perhaps even the chance to return the women to their home. The day had finally arrived. The ship, once abandoned and broken, now gleamed like a star in the twilight of the junkyard. John checked every system one last time, making sure the engines, navigation, and life support were all functioning perfectly. The three women moved gracefully around the cabin, examining every control panel and compartment with curiosity and care. Their expressions reflected excitement, anticipation, and a quiet confidence that this journey could succeed. John could hardly contain his own excitement. After weeks of effort, collaboration, and learning from each other, they were ready to leave the safety of the junkyard and take their first flight. He had imagined this moment for years, working on spacecraft, dreaming of exploring the stars, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of flying with three living beings from another world. His heart raced as he ran through the final checklist, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. Once everything was ready, John gestured for the women to take their places. They understood immediately, moving to the designated seats and securing themselves. John fastened his own seatbelt and glanced at them, smiling. Though words were still limited between them, the connection they shared needed no translation. They had trusted him, helped him, and worked alongside him. Now they would soar together into the sky, bound for adventure. With a deep breath, John activated the engines. The ship vibrated gently at first, then steadily grew stronger. Lights on the panels flickered, screens came alive with data, and the hum of energy filled the cabin. The women leaned slightly forward, their eyes wide with wonder. John guided the ship slowly at first, testing every system as they lifted from the junkyard. As they rose higher, the city below grew smaller, and the horizon stretched endlessly. For John, the feeling was indescribable. He had dreamed of this moment for decades, and now it was real. The women began to react to the movement of the ship, in small but noticeable ways. One hummed softly, as if the vibration resonated with her own being. Another gently touched the control panel, seemingly sensing its flow of energy. The third looked out the window, her eyes reflecting the stars, beginning to appear in the twilight sky. John realized that they were not just passengers. They were part of the ship's rhythm, connected in a way that made every system feel alive. As they moved beyond the atmosphere, John focused on navigation. The stars stretched infinitely before them, a panorama of light and possibilities. He adjusted the controls, testing their responsiveness while the women watched intently. One reached out, touching the navigation screen lightly, and the course adjustments she suggested were perfect. John marveled at their ability to work together so seamlessly. This was no ordinary journey. It was a collaboration of human ingenuity and alien intuition, a blending of knowledge from two worlds. Hours passed as they traveled through space. John and the women had learned to communicate in subtle ways, gestures, hums, and shared glances. They laughed when small mistakes happened, and celebrated quietly when the ship responded perfectly. They took turns observing the systems, making minor adjustments, and exploring the ship's interior. Despite the vast unknown around them, there was a sense of comfort in each other's presence. They were a team, facing the universe together, united by trust and curiosity. Eventually, John asked them to show him more about their homeworld. Using gestures, drawings, and small symbols, they shared glimpses of landscapes, cities, and technology, unlike anything John had ever imagined. Floating gardens, glowing rivers, and structures that seemed to defy gravity filled the sketches. He realized that this journey was more than just physical, it was a bridge between worlds. He had discovered not only the possibility of space, travel, but also the chance to learn from a civilization far more advanced and wondrous than his own. As the ship moved steadily through the stars, John felt a profound sense of peace. He had come so far, from a simple curiosity about space to piloting a ship with beings from another world. Together, they had repaired the impossible, navigated challenges, and formed bonds that transcended language, culture, and species. The women on